At his office party, my son laughed and said, "This is the investor I told you about. Just kidding, he's nobody." As colleagues snickered, but when the real investor walked in and hugged me, the music cut out. He froze solid. I was halfway to the dessert table when my son's voice, bright and theatrical, cut through the bass. "This is the investor I told you about. Just kidding, he's nobody." Laughter scattered like broken glass across the room. A few heads turned to measure me, to pin the label to my chest. Nobody. If you're watching this wherever you are, in your kitchen with the kettle just about to whistle, in a bus seat with the city shivering past the windows, in a dull office where the air tastes like old paper, tell me where. Tell me where you would have stood when he said that. I stood very still. A blue spotlight crawled across the parquet floor and settled on a cluster of men in tight shirts and looser ethics. My son's smile was the kind that drinks attention and leaves crumbs. Someone snickered. Someone else hid theirs behind a glass. The music thumped. The air smelled of citrus and ambition. I set my fork down and looked at him, my boy wearing the careful beard, the tight collar, the watch that still had the tag tucked under the strap, because he couldn't bear for anything to look old. He didn't meet my eyes. He was busy looking outward, taking inventory of who had laughed, who had looked away, who had watched to be sure it was safe to laugh. "Good one," said a colleague with a haircut that cost more than the suit. "You got us." "Dad," my son said, as if the word were a stain. "You remember Jason, right? Sales. And Mira from accounts. They run the numbers that scare the rest of us." He moved like a magician curating a trick, directing attention to the right angles so no one would notice the wrong ones. I remember thinking, I taught you to tie your shoes. I taught you not to cross the road until the light said, walk. I taught you please and thank you. I taught you to look a man in the eye when you say his name. Nobody. The word sat between us like a stray dog. I felt something colder than anger unfurl in my chest, thin and patient. I have never been a man who raises his voice. When I was younger, I learned that a flat tone can carry further than a shout. It doesn't spark fire. It drains the room of heat. So, I just smiled. The dessert table glittered with small vanities, pistachio tarts painted with a brush of gold, chocolate domes like polished stones, strawberries the size of a baby's fist. I picked up the fork again, slid it across porcelain, placed a sliver of sweetness on my tongue. It tasted like nothing. He was still performing. Networking, he sang, and the word had that slick, hollow ring of an empty vose. That's the point of tonight. People want to see who's connected. He leaned in, as if confiding. You know how it is, he told the circle, and the circle nodded, even though none of them knew how it was for me. None of them knew the hours when the world is dark and a ledger is darker. None of them knew the years when a man sells his time to build a bridge for a boy who will later insist he made it by himself. I looked down at the polished floor and saw us in the shine. A younger him, with skinned knees, a football under his arm, hair matted with sweat and triumph. An older me, with a hand on his shoulder, the weight of his small body leaning into my palm, as if the world were tilted, and I was the only level thing. You'll be brave, I told him once, when the night scared him and his mother slept warm and tired down the hall. You'll be kind, I told him on another night, when he cried because a boy at school laughed at his shoes. He asked, what if I can't be both? And I said, then be kind first. Brave is easier. He believed me then. He was 5. He was a miracle who spoke my name with 2 syllables that tasted like sugar. Dottie. He believed everything I said because his mother believed it, and when she believed something, even the weather straightened its tie. The music climbed and fell. The laughter faded and returned like a tide. I heard the event manager tell a bartender to keep the champagne cold because the big guy was running late. I filed that detail away like a receipt slipped into a wallet. Not for now, for later. I kept my eyes on my son. He was turned 3/4 to me, the way people stand when they want to include you without including you. He'd always been good at angles. In school, geometry frightened him. But he became expert in the shape of a room. He learned where to stand to be visible, where to lean to be overheard, where to position a joke so it landed on someone else's shoulders. I know because I watched him learn it. I watched him learn everything. The lights along the ceiling were ribbed, throwing shadows that looked like prison bars across the walls. It made me think of another set of lines, The ones etched in the corners of my late wife's eyes when she laughed, when she winced, when she stayed awake past midnight stitching our lives together with thread made of patience. She hated these kinds of rooms, the noise, the performance, the finger food that pretended to be meals, but she would have come for our son. She would have stood with her hands wrapped around a glass of sparkling water and smiled to be polite. Then, when no one was looking, she would have pressed her shoulder against mine and whispered, "There's too much starch and too little soul here." And I would have answered, "You make anywhere warm." And it would have been true. She could warm a room by standing inside it. She could cool rage by laying a hand on my arm. She could make small boys believe in big futures because she believed in both. My son was telling a story that wasn't his, about a pitch that landed because he spoke the language of capital. He said the word capital like it had been waiting for him all his life. I remembered the night I taught him to read the first ledger I ever let him see. He was 10. We sat at the dining table under the yellow light that softened the imperfections in the paint. He pinched the pencil too high, and his nails were bitten to the quick. He asked questions that made my throat ache. Who decides what something is worth? And why do people pay more for the same thing if it comes in a nicer box? And does money make people better or just louder? I told him the truth as I knew it then. Money makes people more of what they are already. If you're generous, it gives you reach. If you're mean, it gives you a microphone. He nodded and wrote the words down like notes for an exam. He was good at exams. Life is not an exam. There are no invigilators to stop you from cheating yourself. "Dad," he said now, eyes flicking toward me, and away with the same motion, a bird too quick for a net. "You're not bored, are you?" And the circle laughed again, relieved to be given a cue. I let the question sit. I wiped a crumb from the corner of my mouth. I put the fork on the plate like a small decision. Then I said, in the voice I save for truths that need to be heard without decoration, "No, I'm paying attention." He didn't know what to do with that. He had expected the flustered wave, the apologetic shuffle, the old man's easy surrender. He had forgotten that I don't surrender. I reframe, I redirect, I wait. Not anger, something colder, a slow river under ice. Across the room, the DJ changed tracks, and a familiar tune threaded the air. Our song, not mine and my son's, mine and his mother's. I didn't believe in fate, but I believed in the small mercies of coincidence. We danced to it on our 10th anniversary, barefoot on the kitchen tiles, because the parquet had a nail loose, and she was afraid I'd slice my foot. She wore a blue dress with a tiny rip at the hem she kept promising to fix. "We'll get new floors one day," she said, and I told her, "These are good enough. They've learned our steps." That night, after we put our boy to bed, we stood in the doorway watching him sleep. He had kicked the blanket off, a starfish surrender, and she tucked it back around him with the care of someone wrapping a gift that no one else would know how to open. "Promise me," she said, "that no matter what, we'll keep the house full. Full of people, full of kindness." I promised. She died 3 years later. I kept the promise as well as a man can when half his vocabulary is gone. The office party smelled like leased furniture and expensive cologne. The art on the walls was a safe kind of bold, geometric shapes in careful colors that couldn't offend. The city glittered like a boast beyond the glass. It was the sort of night where people measured themselves against other people and called it networking. My son smoothed his tie and said something about a meeting later with the real investor, and his colleagues leaned in to catch the phrase, to own a small share in its importance by hearing it early. "He's running late," someone offered. "Traffic." "He'll make an entrance," someone else said, as if that were a virtue. The bartender poured, the bubbles rose. A woman in a silver dress laughed with her teeth closed. When my son was 12, he broke his arm falling from a wall he had climbed because he wanted to see what was on the other side. I raced to the hospital in a shirt inside out because I didn't notice until they pointed, and he still teased me about it years later. The last private tenderness he allowed himself to show me in public. I signed the forms while he clenched his jaw and tried to be brave because he thought bravery meant silence. I told him then, brave doesn't mean quiet. Brave means honest. He nodded, and then he cried anyway because the doctor set the bone and pain is a teacher that refuses to be ignored. After, I bought him ice cream, and he held the cone in his good hand and said, "I want to build the kind of wall people don't fall from." We laughed because he hadn't learned yet that some industries are nothing but walls with traps built into the ladders. A colleague with slicked hair tapped my son's shoulder and said, "Your guy texted." 10 minutes out. There it was, the promise of spectacle. The circle brightened. Nearby circles drifted closer like petals to the same light. My son glanced at me then, just for a heartbeat, the way climbers glance down before they remember they shouldn't. "You'll see," he said under his breath, but not quietly enough. He wanted the sentence to be heard and misheard, wanted it to look like confidence. "You'll see the room I'm walking into." I let my eyes travel over the room. The company logo shone against a hedge wall that wasn't a hedge at all, but plastic leaves arranged to look like life. The CEO worked a far corner like a politician. There were small plates balanced in nervous hands, and the distant clatter of cutlery shaped the soundtrack of trying too hard. I could feel my wife beside me, the way you feel sunlight on a winter morning, a memory that warms without burning. She would have said, "Leave now. You owe nobody this." And I would have said, "I owe him." And she would have tilted her head, the way she did when she found the precise line where fairness and firmness met, and she would have replied, "You owe him the truth, not the stage." Then she would have kissed my cheek and I'd have found myself twice as tall, because that's what love does. It adds inches nobody can see. "Dad," my son repeated, this time with a small edge, because my silence wasn't doing what he expected. "Don't look so lost." The word landed strangely. I have been many things in my life. Poor, tired, certain, wrong, but never lost. When the power went out during storms, I navigated our house in the dark by touch. The nick in the banister where the movers grazed it the week we arrived. The smoothness of the wall where our boy ran his hand every morning when he was too sleepy to trust his feet. The chipped corner of the kitchen counter where my wife set a hot pan by mistake and laughed at herself for a week. The map of a life stays under your fingers long after the lights come back on. I set the plate down, wiped my fingers on the napkin, folded it. "Lost?" I asked, and I let a slow smile show without reaching my eyes. "No." He watched me as if waiting for me to apologize, to shrink, to ask for permission to stay in the room my money had helped pay for. I didn't. "I'm thinking," I said, "about value." The word made the circle shift. Value is a word of worship here. A couple of them nodded reflexively, like people who suspect they've missed a joke. He rolled his shoulders back, performed a stretch that said tension without admitting it. He was measuring again. He lifted his chin toward the door, a stage cue. "He's coming," someone hissed, and the DJ slipped the volume down a notch as if the air needed more room. Phones rose. Faces arranged themselves in poses they believed would be flattering if caught in the same frame as money. I didn't turn. Not yet. I looked at my son instead. At the line of his mouth that was almost his mother's, and the set of his jaw that was very much mine. I let the years spool back, a film unspooling on a machine that clicks if you listen closely. I saw him at 3 with jam on his cheeks, at 8 with muddy knees and a soccer medal that bent where it shouldn't, at 15 with a face full of thunder because I had said no to the party everyone was going to, and "you don't get it" was the verdict that made him a judge I couldn't appeal. I heard my wife's voice, low and certain. "He will test you because he can. You will hold because you must." I had held. I had held even when grief hollowed me out and turned me into a cave that echoed with his footsteps coming and going at hours that worried the neighbors. I had held when he learned to turn kindness into currency and spent it wherever it bought him applause. I had held when he began to treat home as a hotel with sentimental rates. I held because I promised. And even now, when he tried to turn me into a punchline, I held. I held my temper, my posture, my sense of the story. It was not finished, not tonight. The room thought it knew what was coming. An entrance, a handshake, a speech, a photo. They didn't know that sometimes an entrance is a return, and a handshake is a memory, and a photo can capture the precise moment a boy looks at a man and finally sees him. The door opened, a draft slithered in, carrying rain and the scent of hot asphalt. Heads turned as one. I felt the attention tilt, the way a ship lists when passengers all rush to one. Sighed, I stayed where I was. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the plate until I could feel the fine grit of a mist wash. I breathed. The music softened to a hum that made the air feel padded. My son lifted his chin higher, the way he used to when he balanced on the curb as if it were a tightrope. and I stood with my hands ready, not touching him, but ready, always ready. Before the first step sounded on the floor, before the room adjusted itself around the new arrival, before names were thrown like confetti, I heard a voice I knew like the back of my own hand, not because I had heard it 1,000 times, but because I had heard it once in a year that mattered, in a room where deals were made quietly while other men bragged about louder ones. I heard, "There he is," and the words did not aim at my son. I did not turn, not yet. I let the syllables land where they were meant to, not on the stage, but somewhere smaller and steadier. My chest felt like winter sun, pale but warm enough. My son's mouth shaped a name that wasn't mine. He began to move forward. I stayed. The story was still being told, and it was mine. The door breathed open and the room tilted toward it, but I didn't move. I let the first ripple pass over me and settle somewhere else, like rain choosing a gutter. My son took 2 steps, then stopped to straighten his tie again, because performance is nothing without props. "Stay here, Dad," he murmured without looking at me, as if I were a coat he didn't want to carry onto the main stage. "I'll handle the introductions." He said handle in that clipped way he uses when he wants me to understand that my part in the play is silence. I heard the soft echolocation of his colleagues, little hms and ohs, and the rustle of bodies angling themselves into better sight lines. Everyone rehearsed smiles as if they were passwords. I kept mine small and private, not anger, something colder. A winter lake with the sun on it, bright and unbroken. A woman touched my elbow, my son's wife. Her bracelets talked before she did. She had worked hard to look effortless tonight, hair like poured ebony, dress that whispered when she turned. "Do you have everything you need?" she asked, but the question was not a question. It was a reminder. Her eyes slid over my jacket the way a jeweler inspects a stone that won't make the front window. "They're bringing out the champagnes for the VIPs. It gets crowded near the front." She smiled like a receptionist with a policy. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable by the balcony?" "Comfortable?" I repeated, the word flat, harmless, placed gently on the table between us like a coin. "I'm fine." She read nothing in my tone because she was listening for heat and I offered none. My wife used to say, "Some people only read weather. Give them a map and they'll still carry an umbrella." The daughter-in-law gave the kind of shrug that costs nothing and buys distance. She lifted her chin toward my son, who was already curating proximity to the door, and I could almost hear the thought pass between them. Keep him back. 2 young men in identical black outfits appeared by the velvet rope that had been rolled out, while the room pretended not to notice. One of them glanced at me, took a half step, then checked himself when the event manager, sharp eyes, clipboard like a shield, shook her head the smallest fraction. The signal was clear. The rope was not for everyone. Not for fathers who arrive alone and don't trade business cards like currency. I watched the rope land between me and my boy. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. Most barriers are more idea than object. "Sir?" One of the black sleeve boys tried again, softer. The main aisle's crowded. Might be better to stand near the back. He was a polite kid with a face that hadn't learned yet how to hide his instructions. His glance kept ricocheting toward my son, and I knew there was a script printed somewhere that used words like flow and capacity. I also knew who had asked for the script to be enforced. "Appreciate it," I said, and stepped precisely half a foot to the left, outside the invisible lane, but not outside the room. The boy nodded, relieved. He thought the crisis averted. He didn't know that sometimes compliance is not retreat. It's reconnaissance. My son's voice rose above the padded music. He was laughing at something no one had said. "Guys, once he's here, we move quick. 30 seconds each, make it clean." He made a chopping motion with his hand. Timekeeper, bouncer, ringmaster. He shone under the lights in a way that made me think of foil in a school project. Bright, brittle, easy to crumple if you're not careful. "Dad," he called suddenly, as if remembering a plant in the corner and deciding to water it for the guests' sake. "Don't worry if you can't hear the speech from there." A few heads turned toward me, then away. "It's technical," he added, the way people add a lid to a pot so nobody peeks. "I'll explain later." "You'll explain later," I repeated, not loudly, not to him. The words tasted like déjà vu. When he was 16 and came home at 3 with a mouth full of excuses and jacket pockets that smelled like other people's decisions, he had said, "I'll explain later." and later had always been a shadow that never learned to stand upright. I let the old disappointment rise, and then let it pass through me like wind through the ribs of an empty house. I did not keep it. It had no use now. I keep only tools, a memory. The first time my boy wore a suit. Our living room turned into a mirror because we needed all the angles we could get. My wife stood behind him, fingers smoothing his shoulders, as if he were a page with a crease she could iron out. He made a face in the glass because he was 13, and faces are masks at that age. "How do I look?" he asked, and my wife said, "Like a poem that hasn't learned it rhymes yet." I laughed. He rolled his eyes and preened anyway. That was the day he learned what clothes could do in a room, and that was the day I told him what character must do to match them. "When you enter," I said, "carry more kindness than fabric." He nodded because boys nod when their mothers are watching. The years after taught him how to fold ties, but not always how to fold pride. A colleague drifted near me now, with the aimless gravity of someone who doesn't want to be seen wanting to look. "So," he said, eyes skidding off mine like pebbles on a pond, "you must be family." I saved him from the guess. "I'm his father." He arranged surprise on his features. "Oh, well, that's great. He's been absolutely killing it." I let that sit. People are very free with obituaries and murder when they talk about work, killing it, crushing it, destroying. They don't see the bodies on the other side of their sentences. "Congratulations," he added, as if the skill to belong to a person could be earned like a bonus. "He's quite something." "He is," I agreed. "Quite something." I watched the colleague decide whether I had praised or condemned. He chose praise because it would be awkward to choose the other. "He says the investor is a legend," the man confided, lowering his voice. "Came from nothing, built from grit. You know the story." I did. I knew it in the way I know the paleness of my left palm, unglamorous, permanent. The colleague kept talking because silence panicked him. "Honestly, big break for him if this goes how he says." He leaned in. "First time with a player of that level. The man stopped, face rearranging into the polite blank people wear when they realized they might be stepping on toes that could kick back. "Anyway, big night." He retreated. I watched him go, then listened to the hum gathering near the rope. My son had slipped into a new voice, the one that vibrates with borrowed importance. "We'll position near the hedge," he told his curated half-circle. "Cameras from the right." He offered advice he had read somewhere and wore it like tailoring. He did not look at me. When he finally did, it was to say, "Dad, don't come forward unless I call you. You'll crowd the moment." I let my mouth shape a smile that didn't travel upward. "You think I would crowd you?" I asked, soft. He heard judgment and mistook it for attack. "Don't start," he hissed, the hiss shaped like a teenager's, not a man's. "Not tonight." He turned away before my reply could reach him. It didn't matter. The reply would have been simple. I don't start. I finish. The rope clicked, lifted, fell. The room inhaled as one. I saw the silhouette before I saw the man. Compact, steady, the stride of someone who measures rooms by pressure, not noise. The DJ bled the music down to a thread, so thin it could be snapped by a cough. My son moved forward, lifted a hand, mouth prepared to form a brand new friendship in public. And then a small human thing happened. The man came in and, before taking a step toward the light, wiped his shoes on the mat twice, like a person raised in a house with rules, like a person taught to respect the floors. My wife used to stop our boy at the door and make him do that. "Shoes," she'd say, and he would grumble and obey because she could turn grumble into ritual with one look. Watching him wipe his shoes, I felt something quiet fall into place, like a picture frame straightened. "Sir," my son said, a fraction too loud. The man glanced the way a person glances at a voice they don't yet own, and he nodded a nod that neither invited nor rejected. There was a pause long enough for the room to become aware of its own breath. Then the man's gaze went sideways, skipping over logos and invitations, and landed where I was not trying to be seen. The effect was immediate and audible, the kind of hush that happens when a dropped glass doesn't shatter, but might. "There he is," he said again, warmth on the words, and his face opened the way doors open in summer, no creak, just swing. My son didn't understand. He kept his hand extended into a shape the moment no longer needed. The man walked past it like a river walks past a stone. He came toward me, not quickly and not slow. The way you approach an old chair you know will hold. All at once the room was a tunnel, and only the footsteps mattered. I didn't move. I let him come. When he reached me, he did not make a show of the gesture. He did not perform. He put his arms around me with the kind of hug that men give when the world has demanded too much from both of them, and they survived anyway. He smelled like rain and tobacco someone else had smoked in his cab. "Old friend," he said in my ear, and in that simple phrase the past rearranged itself into clarity for everyone within range. He stepped back and took my shoulders in his hands. "You don't call, you don't visit. You make me work to find you." I smiled with the small ache her name always presses behind my ribs. "You know I'm stubborn," I said. "She tried and failed for 20 years. He looked at my face then. The real look, not the quick scan people do to harvest details. And he understood who she was in that sentence without me telling him. "I am sorry," he said, voice lowered in a way that made apology sound like a promise. "She kept us honest." I nodded because anything more would have been too heavy in my throat. The hush in the room was now a weight. It pressed on people's lungs and made them miscalculate their next expressions. My son's mouth had settled into an open shape that confessed more than any sentence he might have written for this moment. His wife's fingers tightened on the stem of her glass until the knuckle blanched like a small flag surrendering. A phone that had been lifted for a picture drifted down, the lens suddenly embarrassed. I felt the edges of my patience sharpen, not anger, something colder, the clean slice of truth. "Gentlemen," the man said at last, turning with his hand still on my shoulder, "forgive me. This is who taught me to do numbers that don't lie." A little laugh went around the circle and died, because there was no safe place for it to land. He wasn't done. "When I was nothing in a borrowed suit, your father," and here he squeezed just once because some truths need anchoring, "sat across a metal desk and told me my work was sound, but my partners were not. He was right. He saved me 5 years of climbing a ladder they would have kicked away." He let go and faced me again, his eyes not glossy, not performative, just bright with a memory he kept measured. "I owe you more than my portfolio shows." My son's inhale was a small storm. He recovered enough to step forward with a smile he stapled to his face. "Sir, this is incredible. I had no idea you knew my father." The man looked at him, kind but not fooled. "Son," he said, and the words stripped away the job titles like winter removing leaves. "We all know someone before we know what they are to us." He extended his hand then, but it was not the outstretched hand of a door prize. It was a hand being offered because manners are not situational. My boy took it. His shake was quick, his eyes searching the room for a new cue that would let him climb back onto the moment. "Dad," he said, and there was a new note in it, a note that remembered kitchens and scoldings and the soft drag of slippers down a hallway. He tried to make his mouth move in a way that would pull me into his narrative. "Why didn't you tell me you and—" He stopped, because using the name would have put an address on a thing he wanted to keep everywhere. "You knew each other?" "I did," I answered, and I kept the words even, not to punish him, but to keep the floor from listing under anyone else. "You didn't ask." He blinked. He was not used to doors being that simple. He had learned to look for hidden hinges when the lock was in his own hand. "Well," he began, and somewhere in the room, a laugh he'd summoned earlier tried to find its way back to him and failed. That's some coincidence." The man shook his head. "Coincidence is when two strangers meet," he said gently. "This is what happens when respect remembers." The event manager, brave by necessity, slipped into the silence with a tray of glasses like offerings. "Shall we toast?" she chirped, voice hovering at the exact point between cheer and apology. People took stems they didn't want because hands need tasks. My son lifted his, eager to regain the stage, and the man let him, because grace is also a kind of power. "To partnerships," my boy declared, "and to the future. We're going to build together." He angled his glass toward the man, then toward me, because the room required the gesture. "To people who believed in us before anyone else did." It should have worked. In another story, it would have landed and settled and saved him. But the room had already seen the shape of the truth, and you can't make people unknow what they know just because it would be easier to move on. I took my glass and did not drink. I felt the old ache of my wife as a steadying hand again, the way she used to press her palm to my chest when she could feel a storm under my shirt and say, "Breathe with me." I breathed. I looked at my son, really looked. The line of his jaw was an argument, the set of his shoulders a defense. I thought of the nights I had sat up waiting for him, the hours when the house was too quiet and the clock grew loud, the morning I found him asleep in the doorway because he had lost his keys, and pride wouldn't let him wake me. I thought of the promise I made over a bed we didn't want to leave empty, full of people, full of kindness. The measure of a man is not whether he can swing a blade, it is whether he can sheath it. Value, I said again, softly, to no one and to everyone. My son heard it this time and flinched the smallest flinch a son can make in public. He was searching for the shape of my answer, the way a boy gropes for a light switch in a strange room. The man patted my back once and let his hand fall. "I'll borrow him a moment," he told the circle, and there was an invisible without your permission attached to it that made space open. He guided me 2 steps aside, a small island of quiet in a crowded sea. "You still keep your counsel like coins," he murmured, not unkind. "You could have told him and taken some sting out." "I could have," I admitted. "But sting teaches too." He tilted his head. "And what do you want him to learn?" The answer came without effort, old and ready. "How to be kind when the room is watching. It's easy when the lights are off." The man's mouth lifted. "Hard lesson." "Worth it," I said. We stood there a breath longer, 2 old men pretending our knees didn't ache, while the party tried to reorganize itself around a reality it had not RSVP'd to. My son approached, his wife a step behind, her bracelets newly quiet. "Sir," he said to the man, carefully calibrated, "we've prepared a small lounge for you, if you'd like to freshen up before the—" He searched for the word that would make everything simple again. "Before the chat?" The man looked at me, not at the lounge. "I will, in a minute." Then he added, as if discussing the weather or a game both of us had watched, "Your boy knows how to fill a room. He'll learn, with time, how to leave it fuller." I nodded. "He will," I said, not because I was certain, but because I had decided to be. My son's eyes glittered with questions and calculations. I could almost see the columns in his head, adding and subtracting approval, dividing embarrassment by opportunity, multiplying by the number of witnesses. He tried a smile that could be read a dozen ways. "Dad, why don't you sit? I'll come get you when the—" He cut himself off because the lie in that sentence would have been visible. "When it's time." He was still trying to stage manage a moment that had outgrown its stage. "I'm comfortable," I said again, and this time the word landed where it should. He heard what was beneath it. "I am where I belong." He cleared his throat. "Okay." Then, softer, in a tone that was almost the boy bending over a jigsaw on the kitchen table, asking for the piece he couldn't find. "Don't go far." He didn't look at me when he said it, but the plea floated between us anyway. A small boat that didn't want to admit it needed a dock. I turned slightly and rested my palm on the back of a chair, feeling the grain run like faint rivers beneath the lacquer. My breath was steady. The man clapped my shoulder once and went to accept the room's next demand on him. A camera, a handshake, a story he'd told too many times for it to own him anymore. The music crept up again, then faltered as if unsure it had permission. Laughter fluttered and perched. My son stood with his circle and said nothing for a full 5 seconds, which was longer than some people in that room had ever said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, and for a moment he sounded like the boy who asked me why people pay more for the same thing in a nicer box. "We'll start in 10, he told them. "Keep it tight." He didn't look at me again right away. He needed time to file this moment under a heading that wouldn't bruise when he touched it. I let him have it, not mercy. Something colder that becomes mercy when it melts. In my head, without meaning to, I saw my wife in the doorway again, her hands clasped because she always clasped them when conversations turned toward pride. "Let him find you," she would say. "Don't chase." And so I did what she taught me. I stood my ground with my hands gentle at my sides, and I waited for the next turn of the wheel. The room tried to pretend nothing had changed, but it had. You could hear it in the way people cleared their throats, in the awkward clink of glasses on glass. The DJ put a safer song on, the kind that lives in the background and asks nothing from anyone. My son leaned close to the man and spoke too fast. That is how speed sounds when it is hiding fear. I stood where I was and let air fill my lungs in a slow count, the way I used to do when I carried our boy to bed and didn't want to wake him by breathing too loud. The man, my friend, though I never called him that for show, shook my son's hand again and said something short. Then he turned back toward me, and the space between us felt like a path I knew by heart. "Come," he said. No performance, just a word. We stepped aside to the edge of the room where the shadows are kinder. I could feel eyes on the side of my face like warm lamps. "You should have told him," he said under his breath, not scolding, only stating. "You let him walk blind into a mirror." "I wanted to see what he would do when he looked at himself," I answered. "I wanted to see who he would be without a script." He tilted his head. "And?" I took a moment. My wife taught me to wait for the honest word, not the quick one. "Half boy, half man," I said. "Both loud, one can still learn." The event manager slid toward us like someone rolling a rug back into shape. "Sir," she told the man with a practiced smile, "your lounge is ready. We can have the term sheet brought in. 10 minutes if you like." She looked at me and added, "We have water or coffee if you prefer." She was efficient, careful, one of those people who keep nights like this from collapsing. The man thanked her and then looked at me. He waited. I understood the question behind his pause. "Go ahead," I said. "It's your show now." He smiled a little. "You never wanted a stage." "No," I said. "I wanted a roof." He went with the manager. I stayed where the light turned soft. My son's wife appeared again, her bracelets quieter, her voice dipped in honey. "I didn't know," she said, and her face arranged itself into the sympathy you wear when you bump into your own reflection in a glass door. "He never told me," I nodded. "He never asked me." She blinked, looked over her shoulder as if she might find the right line waiting on a tray. "You know how he is," she tried, and there it was, the first small stone placed in a wall that keeps a person from ever having to climb down. "I do," I said. "I knew him when he was kind without trying." I let that live between us. She didn't pick it up. She touched my sleeve, more nervous than tender, and drifted back to the place where faces are kept tidy. Colleagues changed shape around me. Earlier, they were watchers who measured me with laughter. Now they smiled too much. A man with a tight tie told me he always appreciates the older generation's presence in the ecosystem. He used ecosystem like a spell. A woman said she loved legacy stories and asked what my secret playbook was. I thought of my wife's grocery list on the fridge and our son's first ledger with pencil smudges where he had pressed too hard. I said, "Pay on time. Tell the truth." She waited for more. There wasn't more to give that was honest. She smiled as if I had told a joke and moved away to a place where answers are prettier. I turned to the balcony doors and let myself out into the night air. The city below buzzed like a neon hive. The rain that rode in with the man earlier had passed, leaving a wet shine on everything. Far down, a taxi turned a corner and left a yellow streak on the road that lights paint when no one is watching. I put both hands on the railing and felt the chill sink into my palms. I could hear the party through the glass, a softened beat, the glide of shoes, the rise and fall of a room trying to be important. I could also hear my wife. She always sounded like home. "Is this the moment?" she would have asked, standing beside me with her shawl pulled tight because she felt the cold before I did. "Not yet," I would have told her. "Almost." The door slid open behind me. My son stepped out. He stood there with his shoulders squared, then let them drop an inch when he saw I wasn't going to fight him for the air. For a second, he was the boy again, not the man in a rented posture. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, low. The question carried more than he wanted it to. About him, about any of it. "Would it have changed how you introduced me?" I asked. He looked away toward the wet shine below. His jaw worked. "I was joking," he said. "You took it too?" He stopped. He heard it. The old script. I waited. "It was wrong," he said quietly, like a man saying a password he isn't sure he deserves. "I'm sorry." The word came out without decorations. I could respect that. I did not rescue him from the silence that followed. He had to stand inside it and learn its shape. "I didn't tell you," I said at last, "because I wanted to see how you treated a person you thought was small." He flinched the flinch that is mostly inside. "People aren't small," I added. "Rooms make them look that way, and rooms can lie." We stood that way for a while. The city hummed like an engine far away. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, a habit from childhood that meant he was thinking. "Are you investing?" he asked finally, and every bit of training he had taken from the world sharpened the question. Not, are you proud? Not, are you okay? The money first. I didn't blame him for it, but the truth landed as a weight. I already did, I said. His head snapped toward me. What? I kept my tone even. Years ago, not in a company, in a person. He asked for my time. I gave it. It paid interest in the form of a friend who remembers respect. He stared, confused. I meant tonight, he said, too fast. This round. I know what you meant, I said. I'm answering what you need to hear. He swallowed. I need this, Dad. There it was. The hard truth laid naked. Need. He had always hated that word when it applied to him. He liked want. Want is a bow you tie. Need is a knot you admit. I know, I said. Do you know why? He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head once. He didn't know how to say it without tasting the iron of it. So, I said it for him. Because you've mistaken applause for agreement. You've built a room full of mirrors and called it a market. He winced, then nodded. Could take a straight line. I loved him for that, even when it cut us both. The door slid again. The man stepped out with the event manager behind him. We're ready, she told my son. Her eyes flicked to me. There was a question there, but she knew not to voice it. 2 minutes, my son said, and in those 2 words he tried to pull the world back into its neat boxes. The manager nodded and left. The man came to the railing and stood between us, looking down at the city as if it were a board with pieces he had decided not to move tonight. You remember the first time you advised me? He asked me, not taking his eyes off the wet grid below. Your office had a fan that clicked and a window that stuck. I remember, I said. You were angry. You thought anger and truth were the same tool. He laughed under his breath. You told me my math was right and my friends were wrong. You handed me a glass of water and said, drink before you talk. He turned then and looked at my son. He made me drink. It saved me from saying things I couldn't buy back. My son took that in. He glanced at me, then away again. The man's voice softened. I am here because he asked me to look at your numbers. They are promising. You are clever. Your market exists. Your team is not terrible. It was honest, and my son recognized the gift in that. But, the man added, you are running on fumes in a tank labeled confidence. That runs out faster than fuel. My son nodded, a little dazed. I can adjust, he said quickly. I can... The man lifted a hand. Tonight is not a test of pitch decks. He held my son's gaze. It is a test of how you carry other people when the room says you don't have to. He let that land. Then he patted the balcony rail like a table where a deal has been settled. We go in together. You speak, then he speaks. He tipped his chin at me. My son blinked. He? The man smiled. He is why I'm here. He gets a minute. My son made a face like a boy asked to share a toy he believes is his because he had it first. Then he caught himself. Of course, he said, and the words were smoother than the thought behind them. That was fine. Sometimes you practice the right thing before you believe it. Inside, the party had collected itself into neat lines near the makeshift stage. The hedge wall glowed. The logo shone. The rope formed a tidy boundary the way a river forms a rule. We walked in together, 3 points of a small triangle. People parted like a curtain, and all the murmurs in the room pointed in the same direction. My son stepped up, took the microphone in a hand he kept still by force, and smiled the smile he uses when he wants to sell sincerity. Thank you for being here, he began, and the room settled. He was good at this part. He could thread words the way a tailor threads a needle. He talked about goals and growth, and the way risk tastes when it pays you back. He inserted numbers that were clean and hopes that were dressed like plans. He nodded at departments, named a few people so the rest could imagine they might be next. He did not look at me, but I felt him feel me, the way a man feels a landmark in a fog. Then he said, and tonight we are honored to have a mentor in the room. And his eyes flickered my way. He hesitated, just a beat, and in that hesitation, I heard the small fight inside him, the fight between the script and the truth. He cleared his throat. A mentor to me, he finished, my father. The word father left his mouth and tumbled into the air like a coin. It rolled and did not fall off the table. People clapped, some because they meant it, some because they always clap on cue. He held the microphone toward me. He had not planned to do it. The move was raw. It cost him. I took it, not because I wanted it, but because refusing would have taught the wrong lesson. "Just a minute," I said, and my voice carried without pushing. Rooms like that amplify honesty without asking for volume. I let my eyes take in faces, not to collect them, just to remember that people are watching and that you owe them something steady when they do. "I won't talk numbers," I said. "You have people here who can do that until the lights burn out. I want to talk about value." The word quieted a few restless shoulders. I felt my wife's hand on the back of my neck, the way she used to ground me when I was about to say something that could draw blood. "Value is not only what you sell," I said. "Value is who you become while you sell it." I told them a story, simple, no Polish. I told them about a boy who broke his arm because he wanted to see what was on the other side of a wall, and a mother who tucked blankets like promises. I told them about a young man in a borrowed suit who wiped his shoes before he entered a room that would later call him by his last name, and about a fan that clicked in an office where we learned to drink water before saying words we might regret. I told them that money makes you more of what you already are, and that some nights you find out what that is because you didn't know there was a mirror in the room until you saw yourself laugh. The room listened, not leaned forward hungry, still, like a pond without wind. "My wife," I said, and her name rose in my chest and stayed there where it belonged, asked me before she left to keep the house full of people, full of kindness. I looked at my son's face, at the pride and the shame and the boy in both. "Tonight," I said, "I am keeping that promise." I held up a thin leather folio I had brought and set on a chair when I'd arrived. I hadn't meant to show it this way, but truth likes a clean table. "This," I said, "holds a letter she wrote to our son. It also holds papers connected to a trust in her name, papers that can move money where faith wants to go. It can go here, to this company. It can go somewhere else. It isn't a threat. It is a choice." A ripple went through the room, the way wind moves a field. My son's mouth parted, then pressed flat. The man beside me did not look surprised. He knew a version of this. He had helped me draw the lines on the page months ago, when I asked him to make numbers honest and not hungry. I held the folio at my side again. "I don't trade money for apologies," I said. "I don't buy behavior. I watch it. Tonight is not about a contract. It is about a habit. How do you treat people when you don't think they can return the favor?" I turned a fraction and looked at the staff by the bar. The black sleeve boy who had tried to move me earlier stood there, hands folded, eyes wide. He met my gaze and then looked down because he had been taught to. "You," I said to my son, without the microphone now, but near enough that the room could hear, "have a chance in front of your people to show them what your company values when it is most watched. You can fill the stage with faces that made you look bigger tonight. Or you can fill it with the people who carried trays and opened doors and wiped footprints you never saw." I gave him back the microphone. It wasn't a test you grade with a red pen. It was a window. People would see who he was when he stood at that window. He stood very still. He could choose an easy line. He could say thank you and move on and later tell me I had embarrassed him and that business has rules and that I don't understand optics. Or he could do something simple and hard. He could be kind while the room watched. He glanced at the man. The man did not nod. He did not wink. He did not save him. He waited too. My son lifted the microphone. His voice had changed, lower, slower. Not because it sounded better, but because he wanted it to carry without running. "Could we," he said, turning to the event manager, "have the staff come up here for a moment? The bartenders, the security, the people who made this night work." The manager's face did something complicated and then resolved into joy. "Of course," she said, and she moved like a woman glad to move for the right thing. The staff hesitated. People like them always do when it's not clear if they're allowed to take up space that was not set for them. "Please," my son added, and he stepped down off the little platform to meet them. He shook hands, said names, looked eyes. He had to search for some of those names because he had not learned them before. That was fine. You start somewhere. He led them up. The room watched itself do the math. The hedge wall looked less important with black shirts and tired smiles in front of it. He lined them beside him. "Thank you," he said, and it wasn't a line. "We clapped for slides. We can clap for this." The sound that followed was big and warm, not because clapping is hard, but because people were relieved to clap for something that didn't ask them to pretend. He handed the microphone to the black sleeve boy. The boy startled as if the cord were a live wire. "Say something," my son told him, and it was the first order he'd given all night that sounded like a gift. The boy cleared his throat. We like when people put their glasses in the right place," he said, and a small wave of laughter went through the room, soft and clean. "And when they say thank you." He handed the microphone back like it was a bird he didn't want to crush. I felt something in me unclench, a knot I had tied before I knew whether I would need it. My wife would have cried and blamed the onions. I stood with my hands at my sides and let the room be full. The man leaned over and spoke for me alone. "He took the window," he said. "He did." I kept my voice even. "The habit is built a day at a time." The man nodded. "Then let's build." My son turned back to me. He didn't ask for the folio. He didn't ask for the money. He looked at my face the way a boy looks at a door he wants to open without knocking. "Will you read her letter?" he asked, and a crack opened in the room that let air in. My throat tightened. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It's for you." I held it out. Not high, not dramatic. Just a father handing a son something from a woman who loved them both into existence. He took it with two hands, the way we taught him to take what matters. The man stepped forward then and took the microphone. "We'll talk terms later," he told the room, and the room smiled because terms are a language it speaks. "For now, we'll do something better. We'll start as we mean to go on, with respect." He turned to my son. "Take care of your people. If you do that, money will take care of itself." He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once, like a signature only I needed to read. The music tried to find its way back. It did, but softer, as if it knew it wasn't the loudest thing anymore. People began to move again, but slower. Conversations started without the sharp edges they had before. My son stood with the staff a few minutes longer, asking small questions that opened doors. Then he stepped down and came to me. He held the folio to his chest as if it were a book on a long walk home. "I have a lot to fix," he said, simple as a list. "Start with one thing," I said. "Start with one person, then another." He nodded. He was breathing more like himself now. "Will you?" he began and stopped. He stared at the folio, then back at me. "Will you stand with me while I read this? Not now, later, when the lights are off." My chest hurt in a way that didn't scare me. "Yes," I said. "Of course." He blew out a breath, and some of the performance left his body like air leaving a party balloon after the guests go home. Across the room, a colleague hovered and then decided to approach. He had been there for the joke before. He had laughed. He looked different now, or maybe I finally saw him in a clearer light. "Sir," he said to me, trying to be both casual and careful. "That was, well, it was something." I smiled without showing teeth. "It was a start," I said. He nodded, and for a second I thought he might apologize for earlier. He didn't. That was fine. The apology I needed had already been spoken by the only person who had the right to give it. The man reappeared at my side. "They set the room for signatures," he told me, amused. "They always do, as if paper is what makes something real." He looked at my son. "We'll finish the formalities tomorrow. Tonight belongs to a different kind of agreement." My son stood straighter, not to look taller, to carry weight properly. "Tomorrow," he agreed. He didn't reach for a handshake. He had done enough reaching. He let the night breathe. I looked at the hedge wall, the logo, the rope, the polished floor that had pretended to be a stage. None of it mattered as much as the look on my boy's face when he said please to a waiter and meant it. None of it mattered as much as the letter under his arm. I pressed my palm against the chair again, feeling the grain. I thought of our kitchen table. I thought of the fan that clicked. I thought of my wife tucking blankets and asking me to keep the house full. Inside my chest, the winter lake thawed a little. Not all of it. Enough. The night moved around us, softer now, and if anyone was watching from a bus or a kitchen or a dull office with old paper air, they would have seen something simple. A man putting a hand on his son's back, a son standing still so it could rest there, and another man smiling at both, the way a person does when he recognizes the exact point a story starts to turn. The party kept moving because parties are trained to do that no matter what they've just seen. Trays reappeared like obedient birds. Glasses refilled themselves. The logo on the hedge wall went on glowing, as if light could argue with truth. The man disappeared into the lounge with the CEO and a lawyer carrying a folder too fat for one night. My son stayed near the stage a moment longer, talking to staff, nodding at teammates, letting the new air settle in his lungs. He saw me by the chair with my hand on the backrest and walked over, the folio tucked firm under his arm. His wife trailed behind at a careful distance, measuring the room with her eyes, choosing which faces would matter tomorrow. "Can we talk?" my son asked, quiet enough that it belonged to us. I nodded. We stepped into a hallway where the music turned to a muffled heartbeat and the carpet ate our footsteps. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon and new paint. We stood by a frame print of a city skyline that could have been any city. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I'm not going to defend what I said earlier," he began. "I can't. I did it to look big. It made me small." His voice didn't tremble. It didn't perform. It just told the truth in a way I could hold without dropping. "Good," I said. "Truth weighs what it weighs." He looked at the folio, slid a hand over the leather like he was smoothing a wrinkle. "Is this real?" I lifted a shoulder. "Her signature is real. The rest is numbers following a promise." He traced the edge with a thumb. "I thought—" He stopped. "Number." I didn't think. I rushed. I ran at the night like a dog at a mirror. I saw something I wanted to be and barked at it. I couldn't help it. A small laugh moved through me, warm and short. "You always did scare yourself louder than the thing you were afraid of," I said. His mouth tilted, remembering. "Monsters under the bed," he murmured. "Mom would lie down on the floor and talk to them. You'd turn the light on and read aloud until I fell asleep." He swallowed. I forgot the sound of that. We stood with the print watching us not watch each other. Through the wall, the party applauded something, then laughed the quick laugh that follows applause when people look around to see if anyone important saw them do it. My son took a breath. "He's going to invest," he said, tilting his head toward the lounge. "He told me before we walked out, but he said he wouldn't sign tonight. He said some deals need sleep." He glanced at me. "He also said it's not about him. He said it's about what kind of house I run." The word house hung between us like a familiar coat. "He's right," I said. "It's always a house before it's a company." My son rubbed his jaw. "I have to clean rooms I didn't know were dirty," he said. "I have to fix how we talk to people, how I talk to people." He looked at me full on. "Will you help me?" He was not asking for a check. He was asking for a chair pulled up next to him, at a table he was finally willing to set with better plates. "I will," I said. "But I won't run in front of you. I won't rescue you from the parts that teach you how not to drown next time." He nodded, accepting the shape of the help. "I don't want rescuing," he said, and a younger version of him smiled through that sentence, the one who refused to be carried from the car even when he fell asleep in the last 10 minutes of every trip. "I want learning." The hallway light hummed with the soft sound electricity makes when it remembers it is moving. My son's wife appeared at the end of the corridor and walked toward us with her heels ticking time. "They want pictures," she said to him. Then to me, "The PR team is adapting the story. They'll need quotes." It sounded like a spoon hitting a glass. She caught herself and added, "Please." I looked at my son, and he looked at me, and then he turned to her. "No staged photos," he said. "Not tonight." Her mouth opened to argue. He lifted a hand, gentle but firm. "We had a moment. We're going to leave it a moment. Tomorrow, we explain with actions." She blinked, and in that blink, I saw the list in her pocket rearranging itself. "All right," she said, and the two words were more honest than any 100 she had planned. We went back into the main room together. The man had returned from the lounge with the CEO, and they were making their way toward us. The CEO wore a smile that had been ironed. He extended a hand to me first, the way a smart person does when the room has taught them a new seating chart. "An honor," he said. "We appreciate your presence tonight." Presence was a safe word. "Thank you," I said, and left it there. The man squeezed my shoulder in that small signature of his and asked, "Have you eaten anything that wasn't a circle on a stick?" I shook my head. He laughed. "You never remember to eat when the air is loud." He turned to my son. "Walk us to the kitchen." The four of us went past the hedge wall and down a service corridor where the art stopped and the pipes showed. The kitchen was bright and honest, stainless steel, steam, the clatter of work that doesn't need applause to prove it happened. A woman in a hairnet handed me a plate without fuss, and I ate standing up. Real food that tasted like it was made for eating, not photographing. My son watched the kitchen move, The nods, the hands, the small words that carry big jobs. He asked the head of the team for their names. He asked how long they'd been on their feet. He said thank you. It did not look like theater. It looked like a man learning a language by listening before he spoke. Back in the main room, the event was slipping into its late stage. Ties loosened, heels carried. Deals promised that daylight would later correct. The man checked his watch. "I'm going to call it," he said. "I'm too old to pretend midnight belongs to business." He shook the CEO's hand, then turned to my son. "Tomorrow at 10, no entourage. Bring the person who tells you the truth when it hurts. If you don't have one, find one tonight." My son nodded. "I have one," he said, and when he looked at me, he didn't look away. The man left with a driver who looked like he could open a door without making a sound. As he went, he said over his shoulder, "Drink water before you talk." And I felt the years stacked neatly in that line. The room thinned. People came to say goodnight. Some meant it. A few tried to salvage the earlier version of the story and failed gracefully. The black sleeve boy waved at me with a small, proud grin. I saluted him with 2 fingers, and he blushed like a kid who had been seen by the right eyes. The event manager exhaled like a runner crossing a line. "Thank you," she said, and her thanks had weight. "For what?" I asked. She gestured vaguely at the air. "For making the room behave." We stepped into the elevator. It was just me and my son. He held the folio like a book you don't want to bend, and stared at the numbers blinking down as if they were counting something else. When the doors opened onto the lobby, the night reached in with its wet hands and touched our faces. The porter nodded to us, a small bow that made me like him. Outside, the city was washed clean. The smell of rain and hot metal had settled into something softer. My son unfolded an umbrella. "Come on," he said. "I'll walk you to a cab." I laid a hand on the umbrella and closed it gently. "No need," I said. "Let's walk a little. It's not far." We went side by side, under a sky still holding the last of the storm in its pockets. The pavement shone, streetlights made coins of the puddles. We passed a bakery closing late, the sweet smell of sugar and yeast slipping into the night like a secret. A woman pulled a gate down over a shop with a rattle that sounded like a zipper on a too-full suitcase. Somewhere far off, a train complained. We walked without talking. Every few steps, my son tapped the folio against his leg softly, like a metronome meant for breathing. "I took a loan last year," he said suddenly, the words quick and plain. "Against the apartment." He kept his eyes forward. "I didn't tell you. I told myself I didn't because I wanted to surprise you with success. Really, I didn't because I didn't want to listen." I let that sit a beat. "Is it paid?" I asked. "Almost," he said. "But the terms are bad. I signed fast. I thought speed made me smart." We stopped at a light. The red held us like a parent's hand. "Tomorrow," I said, "bring me the papers." He nodded. "I will." The light went green. We crossed with the small crowd. The city breathed us in and out like 2 more lungs. He glanced at me. "Did you buy into my cap table?" he asked, then laughed at himself. "Listen to me. I can't help it. Everything becomes equity in my head." I smiled. "Not yet," I said, "but I bought something else a while back." He looked over. "What?" "Time," I said. "I bought one afternoon a week for the last 6 months from myself, and I spent it with your old math teacher." He frowned. "Mr. Patel?" "He's still Mr. Patel," I said. We drank cheap tea and argued about interest and patience. He reminded me that the best way to hand you a door was to make sure there was a room worth entering on the other side. My son shook his head, amazed and amused in the same breath. "You always were building rooms I didn't see until I needed them." We turned onto my street. It still looked the same in the places that count. The cat that owned the building 2 doors down, the lamp that buzzed when the weather felt damp, the neighbor who watered plants at odd hours as if the leaves would judge him otherwise. My building steps were wet. The rail felt cool under my palm. We stopped there. I looked up at my window. The curtain was half open. Home is a small mercy that keeps the size of your chest right. "Come up," I said. It surprised him. It surprised me, a little. I had meant to read the letter in his place, to sit in the chair his mother had mended 3 times, to let her words find the walls she had painted. But the night had changed shape, and so did I with it. "We'll read in the kitchen," I added. She liked the tiles better than the sofa. He nodded, a quick child's nod he would deny later if I told it. We climbed, the stairs squeaking their old squeak, the smell of cumin and soap in the air from some other family that knew how to be a family even on hard days. Inside, I turned on the light that makes a circle on the table and left the others dark. My kitchen is not big, but nights like this make it large enough. The table weighted with its familiar scratches. I pulled out the chair with the nick on its leg. He put the folio down like a fragile plate. We stood, then sat, then stood again, because some moments ask your body to move until your mind catches up. "You open it," I said. "It's yours." He slid the leather strap free and lifted the flap. The smell of paper rose, the dry, comforting scent of kept words. He took a breath. "I can't do the letter first," he confessed. "If I hear her voice before I unlearn a few things, I'll pretend I've learned them. I need my ears clean." He pulled out the trust papers instead, spread them like a map, scanned clauses while his old habit returned, thumb and forefinger rubbing as his eyes moved left to right. "You added conditions," he said, surprised but not offended. "They're not traps," I said. "They're rails. They keep the train from mistaking a valley for a road." He read aloud quietly. "A board seat in her name, not taken by anyone, just a chair left empty at meetings with a shawl." He stopped, blinked until the sting passed. "An employee fund, education or emergency, monthly, not when convenient." He kept going. "A rule that the CEO has to spend 1 day a quarter working the lowest paid jobs in the building. No cameras." He looked up. "You wrote these." "We wrote them," I said. "Me and the man, and Mr. Patel. And your mother, when she said you keep the house full." He put a palm flat on the page. "I'll sign," he said, "if he signs too." "He already agreed," I said. "Before tonight. I asked him to, months ago, when I guessed where you might be headed." He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, where the paint bubbles in a corner because the upstairs neighbor's shower has a mind of its own. "I called you a nobody," he said, the sentence slow, like a person taking off a bandage properly. "In a room you paid for, in ways no one saw." I shook my head. "I paid for none of this," I said. "Your mother did, with attention, with patience, with 100 dinners that weren't about food, with notes in your lunch, when you were sad and jokes when you were arrogant." I let the words land. "I did math, she did mercy, we both did time." He lowered his face. "I miss her," he said. "Good," I said. "Hold the missing close. Let it teach you manners you can't Google." He nodded. He reached for the letter, then stopped himself, as he'd warned. He put it back. "Tell me a story instead," he said, looking at the table, not at me. "From before I remember. One where I'm kind." I smiled. "When you were 3, you watched your mother burn her finger on a pan. You disappeared from the kitchen, and we heard small steps and the scrape of a chair. You came back pushing the chair, climbed it, opened the freezer, and took out 2 peas. Not the bag, just 2. You put them on her hand and said, 'Peas for pain.'" He covered his eyes with the heel of his hand and laughed a laugh that hurt both of us in the right way. "I was that boy," he said. "You still are," I said. "You hid him under a suit for a while. He hasn't moved out." We ate the last of the bread from the counter with butter that softened fast in the warm circle of light. He read more of the trust, asked real questions, found one clause he didn't like and argued it well, and I changed it with a line through a sentence and my initials in the margin. When he finished, he closed the folio and sat with his hands on it like he was praying to a new altar. "Tomorrow at 10, he repeated. "I'll bring the loan papers, I'll bring the list of salaries, I'll bring the names I don't know yet." He took a breath. "And I'll read the letter tonight, with you here." We didn't rush it. He washed 2 cups in the sink because his mother would have scolded him if he left them. The water ran, the night hummed through the open window, a taxi horn complained softly somewhere far away. He dried the cups and set them down carefully, upside down like she taught him. Then he came back to the table and sat again, shoulders square, eyes clear. He slid the letter out of the folio with both hands. He didn't open it yet. He looked at me. "Before I read," he said, "I want to say it when it's quiet." He swallowed. "I'm sorry, Dad." He didn't pile words on it. He didn't dress it in reasons or cover it with jokes. He put it down the way a person places a heavy thing on a shelf that will hold. "I know," I said. "I did." I had known since the balcony when the rain smelled like hot metal, and he said need without choking on it. I forgive you. The room didn't change size. The light didn't swell. The air didn't clap. It just felt easier to carry. He looked at the letter. The flap was already tucked, the crease old from hands that once folded shirts better than mine. He slid a finger under and lifted. The paper whispered. His mouth quivered but didn't shake. He held it where the light could read it with us. He glanced at me once, like a boy who finds his father's hand in a crowd. And then he began to read. He began to read, and the first line brought her voice into the room, like a light turned on without a switch. My boys, it said, and he stopped because the plural landed where it should. He swallowed and tried again. My boys, one I married, one I made. If this letter finds you, it means I am where music is soft and pain is honest. I don't know the day you will open it, but I know the shape of it, a day when pride and love will stand in the same doorway and refuse to move. He looked up at me, the way he used to look up from a story when he wanted to make sure the hero was still safe. I nodded. He went on. Value is not a number you can count quickly. Value is the breath after a hard truth has been spoken kindly. It is the way people feel when they leave your table. Keep the house full. If you must choose between being right and being kind, clean the kitchen and then be kind. He laughed, a small wet sound that made both of us breathe easier. He read slower now, as if each sentence were a glass carried across a crowded room. To my son, she wrote, and his mouth trembled on those 3 words, but he kept reading. I raised you to be brave enough to be gentle. The world will try to sell you loudness and call it leadership. Don't buy it. Speak softly enough that people choose to come closer. Your father understands numbers, but when you were 3, you understood peas on a burn. Use both. If ever you forget what you are for, go to the kitchen and do the dishes until you remember. He smiled through it, and the smile was the boy who once insisted on washing every spoon separately like each needed its own river. To my husband, she wrote, and I had to reach for the chair and hold it, because love makes rooms tilt. You are the map that never brags. You are the bread that rises slow and feeds everyone anyway. When they measure you, let them. Then do the work after they stop watching. He turned the page with hands that shook, then steadied. There is a trust, the letter said, but trust is a word with 2 meanings. I have placed money where your father says it will not grow teeth. I have also placed faith where only you can reach it. If either is spent without the other, we will have failed at something more important than a spreadsheet. He paused. We listened to the quiet. Even the refrigerator motor held its breath. There will be a chair left at meetings in my name, she wrote. Do not fill it with a person. Fill it with a shawl. If anyone laughs, let them be cold. He didn't laugh. He nodded, as if she stood by the window with the old blue fabric over her shoulders already. The last paragraph was small, her handwriting compact, where it used to run. When you are tempted to turn someone into a story, you can tell to look taller. Remember the night you were small and wanted to be carried, and both of us. Your tired father, and I pretended not to see because we wanted you to learn you could walk the last 10 steps. Then we carried your bag and not you. That is love. Carry what you can for each other, not each other. Love, always a next, M. He held the letter to his chest and exhaled. He didn't cry with noise. He cried the way a field drinks rain after a long dry. I put my hand on the table so he could see it, not to ask for his. He put his hand on mine anyway. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't need to. The kitchen light hummed its small hum, and the city outside made the sounds cities make when most of them are sleeping, and a few are still trying to outrun what morning will ask of them. He folded the letter once, precisely, and slid it back into the folio like a bird returned to a nest, then stood and rinsed his face at the sink, the way a boy used to after playing in the dust. Tomorrow at 10, he said, and we both glanced at the clock. It was already tomorrow. Sleep here, I said. There's a blanket on the sofa. He eyed the couch, then shook his head. I'll go home, he said. I need to wash the suit off. He grinned a little. You know what I mean. I did. Bring clean shoes, I said. Your mother will nag me if you go important places with yesterday on your soles. He laughed, wiped his face dry, kissed my cheek the way he hadn't in a while, awkward but true, and left with the folio hugged close. I slept like a man keeping watch, which is to say, I slept and woke and slept again. In each waking, I saw him reading the letter. Then I saw him 5 years old, then 30, then 5 again. Dawn came gray and honest. I made tea. I wrapped her shawl around the back of a chair and sat with it looking at me. The fabric smelled faintly of her, soap, and a spice I never learned the name of. But maybe that was memory pretending to be a scent. I let it. At 9:30, he arrived without the suit. Chinos, a shirt with sleeves that could roll, clean shoes. He looked taller without the armor. He had a folder with loan papers and a second folder with a list of names. "The staff," he said. "I went through HR. I wrote them down. I'm going to learn them." He poured himself tea and didn't add sugar. "I read the letter twice," he said. "Once as a son. Once as a man who runs a house." He grinned with his mouth only. I slept in the kitchen chair and not the sofa. It felt right. We walked to the office. The morning had decided to be bright. Traffic did what it always does, complained and obeyed. In the lobby, the receptionist straightened when she saw us. She'd heard versions of last night already. Rumors travel faster than elevators. We went up to a room with a long table and too many outlets. The man was already there, jacket off, shirt sleeves neat, reading our faces before any paper. The CEO sat with his own lawyer, who was younger than his pen. "Good morning," the man said. "Did you drink water?" Before talking, I held up my empty cup. He smiled. "Then let's talk. No cameras, no hedge wall, no rope, just voices." He asked my son for an opening statement, the way teachers ask for a thesis. My son didn't talk about valuation. He talked about the letter. He didn't read it, but he told the room what it told him to be. He talked about the empty chair and the shawl. The CEO glanced at his lawyer, then at the man, surprised but not threatened. The man nodded and turned to me. "Your minute?" he said. Again, I kept it small. "Value," I said, and the word laid its now familiar weight on the table. We propose terms that value people first. Investment in your product is investment in your house. Here are the rails. I slid the trust addendum forward. Employee fund, quarterly floor day for leadership. Board seat left symbolically empty. No voting rights because symbols don't vote, but a line in every agenda that asks, "What would the chair of kindness say?" The CEO half smiled. "She'd say hurry up," he joked, and then, seeing none of us laughed, he sobered. "Fine, she'd say slow down then." Understood. We reviewed salaries. A few numbers flinched. "These are wrong," my son said, and he said it as if he were talking to a mirror. We fixed them before a quarter end. The lawyer warned of cash flow. The man warned of cost of disrespect. He told a story of a company that bled talent because the hallway rumor about how the cleaners were treated tasted worse than any free lunch. We moved through the loan. The terms were predatory. The CEO frowned at the documents and muttered a curse meant for desks and not people. The man made 2 calls that sounded like old friends and ended like solved math. "We refinance," he said. "We teach him to read the small print with big eyes." He tapped the loan papers. "This is how boys learn to be men without forgetting the smallest parts of their own houses." We signed what needed signing, and we didn't sign what needed sleep. The man looked at my son. "This is not charity," he said. "This is business done without forgetting we are people." My son nodded. "My pitch deck didn't have space for the word mercy," he said. "It does now." He took a breath. "I'd like to make an announcement to the team." The CEO checked his watch. "Town hall in 30, he said, then added almost shy, "I'll stand beside you." My son nodded. "You'll stand beside the staff when they speak," he corrected gently. The CEO took it without flinching. "Right," he said. "Beside them." Before the town hall, we found a small room with 2 chairs and no windows. He handed me the second folder. "The names," he said. "Quiz me." I did. He missed 3. He asked for them again. He got them. He smiled without pride. "P's for pain," he said, and we both laughed because we needed to. "Yes," I said. "P's for pain, and bread for hunger, and clean floors for feet that carry more weight than ours." The town hall filled quickly. People who had stood on the edges last night moved closer. The black sleeve boy came in with his colleagues, out of uniform, eyes wide and hopeful, in the way a room makes eyes when the people who run it seem ready to listen. My son waited until the room had found its quiet. Then he spoke. He started with the easiest hard thing, the apology. "Last night," he said, "I made a joke at someone's expense. I did it to look big. It made me small." He looked at me, not for rescue, but to be seen. "I have work to do to earn back trust. I will do it where you can see." He introduced the fund. He announced the quarterly floor day. He said the names of the people who clean, the people who pour, the people who keep plates moving across the border between effort and expectation. He did not say them to display how many he knew. He said them to invite the room to learn them too. The applause that followed was not the kind that demands a second act. It was the kind that says, "Thank you for remembering we are here." The CEO stepped up and did something harder than speaking. He sat down, on the stage in a row with the staff. He asked a question and waited for the answer. The room recalibrated itself. The man stood at the back with his arms folded, not guarding, just grounding. He caught my eye, and we shared the same small look grown men share when the long bet begins to pay. Afterward, people drifted toward me, not with the stare of spectators, but with the gaze of neighbors. A woman from compliance told me she hadn't called her father in months. She stepped aside, made the call, came back with eyes that looked washed. A young engineer admitted he didn't know how to talk to people who scared him. "Start with thank you," I said, "then ask their name, then use it." He nodded as if I had given him the answer on a test. In the corner, the black sleeve boy stood with my son talking about shifts in school. My son said, "Bring me your schedule. We'll make a way." And the boy said, "Nobody does that." And then blushed because of the word nobody, old and heavy and now lighter. "We will," my son said. "Somebody has to start." Before we left, my son walked me to a glass room where the board would meet next month. The table was beautiful and overly polished. He pulled out a chair and placed her shawl over it, smoothing it as if it too could feel cold. A woman passing by paused, eyes wet. My son stood a moment with his hand on the fabric. "We'll keep the chair empty," he said. "We'll fill the rest." I nodded. "Full of people," I said. "Full of kindness." We walked out into a day that was doing its best to be clear. Outside the building, I shook the man's hand. He pulled me into a brief hug, the kind that says, "The work continues." "You did not roar," he said. "You did something better." I listened. I said, "It's your trick," he teased. I smiled. "It's hers." He glanced at the shawl in the memory of his mind and touched his chest. "To her," he said. "To houses," I answered. On the sidewalk, my son and I stood with nothing urgent between us. The folio was under his arm again, lighter now, because words had been read and promises had moved toward plans. "Lunch?" he asked. "Doll at the place that used to give me an extra spoon when I was little." "They still will," I said. "You're still a little foolish some days." He grinned. "So are you," he said, and we both liked the truth of it. We ate at a table near a window that had seen 20 years of people trying to be less hungry. The owner remembered me. He slipped us extra lime wedges like a blessing. My son ate with the appetite of someone who hadn't performed for hours. He told me small stories about his team that we both pretended were unimportant, and therefore absolutely were. We paid. We left. We walked a little more. At my building, he paused again at the steps. He hugged me openly, without pretending to fix my collar. "Thank you," he said, "for not using a shout when a mirror would do." "Mirrors are cheaper," I said. He laughed. He went. That night, after the calls and the emails and the quiet, I stood in my kitchen and washed 2 cups. I dried them the way she taught me. I looked at the empty chair with the shawl and felt the room breathe. I thought of all the rooms I had stood in, some with cheap fans that clicked, some with lights that mistook themselves for truth. I thought of the word nobody, how small it had tried to make me, how small it had made my boy instead, and how the smallest word in the room had turned out to be please. I put the cups down. I turned off the light that makes a circle on the table. If you've been with me from that first line, if you heard him laugh and felt the word nobody scrape across your own chest, tell me where you are now. Are you in a kitchen where the steam fogs the pain? On a bus cutting through the edge of a tired city? In a break room that smells like coffee and ambition? Tell me where you would have stood when he said it. Tell me what you would have said. If this story held a mirror up for you, if it made you think about value, or kindness, or the people who pour your drinks and open your doors, do one simple thing, like this. Share it with someone who needs the reminder, and leave a comment telling me where you're reading from, and what part you'll carry into your own house. Keep the house full. Keep the chair warm. And when the room laughs at the wrong person, let the music cut out.